and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines. This is LeCain with World News Jam. We bring you the most interesting stories from around the world each week. We just don't give you the news, but we tell you the story behind the news, as well as read and answer your questions in an entertaining and easy to understand way. So please join us on 𝗪𝗪𝗋 810 AM Radio Bandito TV and get yourself updated with all the interesting news of the week from around the world right here on 𝗪𝗪𝗋's World News Jam.
Watch and listen to World News Jam, Saturdays, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search 𝗪𝗪𝗋 Radio Bandido.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on 𝗪𝗪𝗋 Radio 810 AM and Radio Bandito TV. My name is LeCain. We don't just bring you the news, but rather stories about the news, things that we hope you will find interesting. Now, today we'll be continuing our coverage of the U.S. election and all the intrigue and drama swirling about there in the U.S. Also, some updates on the war in Israel, but one subject I wanted to get to today is China. Now, we talk about China all the time, usually in relationship to the West Philippine Sea and China's relentless incursion into it because they think it's theirs, or the issue with Taiwan and the constant threats of military action and China's relentless incursion to it because they think it is theirs. But with all the huffing and puffing China does lately, China has started to sputter out a bit. I mean, for the last 50 years or so, China has been getting rich. Their GDP has been on an incredible ride with economic growth in the double digits. They have been responsible for near 30% of the world's manufacturing over the last several decades. And honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to find a home in the Philippines that doesn't have at least 10 things made by China in it. The massive growth in manufacturing also accounts for nearly 30% of China's total GDP. That's $4 trillion annually. The U.S., the second largest manufacturer in the world, their manufacturing accounts for just 11% of its GDP. Now, why is that? Why has China been able to surpass everyone else in the world, including the U.S.? The number one factor, low labor costs. In places like the U.S., where they have unions and an open democratic elections, they have to pay workers at a certain level, and they have to make sure they have a safe work environment, and they have to make sure the worker is an adult, and politicians have to worry about voters who look at their record on employment practices, so they just, won't work people to death for little money. In China, companies, you don't have to worry so much about that kind of stuff. It's a communist country. You do what the party says you do, and you will get paid what the party says you will get paid, and you will not complain or strike or sue or question what the party says. That's great for big corporations, and the taxes are set very low for foreign investors, and they don't have to deal with all the compliance issues and, like I said, lawsuits. This made China very attractive through the years for investors and also made a lot of money for China, leading them to become one of the largest economies in the world. In fact, the largest other than the United States. But it didn't just make the country rich, but it also made the people in general wealthier. China has always been a superpower, but its billions plus population has not always been very wealthy. In fact, a huge swath of the population was very poor. That is until the last several decades. Over those decades, China was able to increase its infrastructure at a substantial rate, thus creating good jobs for millions of people. It was also able to fix the housing problems by building a huge number of modern condos and then giving loans to those middle and upper class home buyers. Now, with all this new wealth, China was able to extend its reach globally. One of the ways of getting other countries to depend on China was to offer loans, big loans that countries would borrow to increase their own infrastructure. Now, I'm sure you're thinking I'm about to talk about the Philippines and the previous administration's relationship with China. But what I would really like to focus on today is Africa, which is similar in many ways. China saw Africa as an opportunity. Many countries in Africa that are developing nations, they lack natural resources and technology to keep up with the progression of the Western world. China was able to step in and give them loans that would fulfill the needs of countries that couldn't get a loan otherwise. Now, many Western nations would give money to these kind of countries in a way of donations, like the U.S. in the past. They would give to the Philippines, but those donations many times come with stipulations, such as with human rights and corruption, and the U.S. deemed as the misuse of law enforcement and military in such said countries. See, when China gives you a loan, they don't really ask about such things, only that you show loyalty to China, that you will also allow them, for instance, to take care of all your manufacturing, or maybe you will buy Chinese products only. Now, this is all well and good. China will give you a loan for your infrastructure costs, and they don't mind if some of the politicians steal part of the money and maybe your elections are rigged, just as long as you're a friend to China. Maybe you even, like Pakistan, start teaching Chinese in your schools instead of English. And for sure, you sign any document saying that you support the One China policy. This is how China has been able to build its global stance. The idea being, when China decides to step up its reach over the South China Sea, or say Taiwan, more countries that support it globally, well, the better for China. Let's say you have been working with China to improve your country's world status, and along the way, all of your close friends got rich. Well, it stands to reason when legal issues come up in the United Nations against China, you will most likely support China. So now you see how China has found its way into the world order, and in many ways, with its BRICS policy, has been on a quest to change that order. So why does it look like China's in trouble now financially? Well, here's where things get interesting. China's economy has grown so much based on manufacturing that it has become maybe too heavily reliant on it. The world has changed a lot in the last several years. Donald Trump got elected in 2016. He started a trade war with China. He started putting huge tariffs on imported goods into the U.S. China was like, if you do that, well, the price is going to go up in your country. And Trump was like, I don't care. But what did that make manufacturers question whether it's really cheaper at this point to produce things in China? More and more people in China are expecting higher paying jobs. Working the 12 hours making shoes for a few yuan doesn't cut it anymore for most people in China. So places that are relying on the cheap labor costs are starting to find that it's harder and harder to find a reason to continue to keep doing business in China. And if manufacturing is starting to decrease, how are people going to pay for all those condos and homes that they have bought that aren't even built yet? The answer is they aren't. China's booming property market was driven by speculative investment returns. People in China love investing in real estate, so every developer started loaning money because it seemed like it would be a solid investment in China's future. But it turns out that it's not that solid. Because of the reckless loaning, China had to start a crackdown saying you can't borrow more money to pay a debt that is already existing. Then in early 2024, Evergrande, the largest, most heavily indebted real estate developer, went bust. Other large ones, such as Country Garden, have already defaulted. This means that buildings that have already started can't be finished, and the people that have already bought on the building are having to default on their loans. This is killing the value of property there. If you invested all your new wealth into real estate, you might find that you're once again not so rich. Some of the other factors that are causing financial problems in China is the aftermath of the insane lockdowns during COVID, the zero COVID policy. If you are producing 30% of the world's cheap stuff and you shut everything down, everything for months, it's going to be a ripple effect. China didn't think that one through very well, did they? They had this stay at home or be arrested policy. And then when China was finally pressured by its own people to open back the factories, those people had not built up any immunities and millions contracted COVID literally overnight. This has all led to the fall in consumer and corporate confidence in China. Right now, the people of China are making more efforts to move their wealth overseas and even move their families out of China. President Xi has made some big boo-boos, but you can't exactly vote him out of office. He made himself president for life. This is another issue that big companies are very worried about, dictatorships. Now, Xi seems to be trying to fix the nosedive China is in right now, but many believe that problem stems from things that took years to get to, which means it may take years or even decades to get out of. For the longest time, China has been the one-child policy, as well as a way to see the sex of the fetus before it was born. Not wanting to have girls, parents opted to abort any female babies and wait for the all-important male baby to be born. The problem now is there are too many men and not enough women to go around, which means less babies, which means China as a population has been shrinking over the past few years, which means China's unique labor force is getting smaller. How is China going to fill all those low-paying, unhealthy jobs that companies need? This is a problem that's not going to be fixed easily. So why didn't China see this coming? A lot of this news is only resurfacing now, yet it took years to develop. Many believe it's because of the fear of President Xi. In China, in the government, if he doesn't like you might just disappear. Many have reported that you don't want to ever bring bad news to Xi, only to bring him positive reports. You may end up being the one blamed if you're the one that shows how bad things have gotten. And this is kind of true. Remember, this became an issue when Trump was in power. He would fire the messenger if he didn't like the news he brought, so people just stopped bringing him bad news. Now, there might be a more reasonable answer for why President Xi is having a hard time now fixing this problem, and it might be he just simply doesn't have the answer, which kind of seems more likely. The real estate collapse, the balloon death, the plummeting fertility rate. What is the answer to fix this? For sure, the West is not going to help China. China has made itself an enemy to most Western countries, and China has become so centralized in the way Xi is running it that it's very hard for local governments to function properly on their own. It's a big country that works in one place, and that may not work in another place, but for now, Xi is running both of them basically the same way. The problem is, once they figure out one solution to one problem, it takes too long to get it rolled out, and finally, before it does, several more problems have surfaced. Now, I know this might be oversimplifying things a bit, but this is how it was created. And a new reason why the economy is falling apart over there. And that is maybe that the president, maybe he just doesn't care. He's more concerned with his own personal political dominance than whether China is faltering in its position in the world. His priority is strengthening the CCP's monopolistic hold on power. Forget the future of the economy and the new global rise of China in the world marketplace. Right now, his concern is his management of the military and the China dominance as a military power. In other words, sacrifice the economy for the sake of nationalism and CCP's dominance. But this may be all he has control over right now. China is clearly losing the technology race in the world, as Taiwan has already signed an agreement with the U.S., which of course infuriated China. But we all know China is trying to counter this by producing the best cheap electric vehicles you can buy. And hey, they did give us TikTok. But can China pull itself out of the quicksand and continue its goal of world domination? It's true that a place like Africa and others have already been hypnotized by the dollars, or rather the yuan, China can lend you. But can China keep collecting loyalties in the direction it's going? The question being, if China falls off into the deep end, what ramifications will that have on the rest of the world? I mean, there was a massive slowdown in the world supply chain. Remember that? It showed how much the world relied on China. But now some countries are looking to ramp up their own manufacturing and give themselves a little more control over their products so they don't have to rely on just China. And this is where companies are starting to look at another country. India. Right now, companies like Apple are looking to India for their cheap labor and no restrictions. You know, a while ago when China was occupied by Japan and India by the Brits, this is a long time ago, they were, good friends. But that friendship has since dried up. Now China is building a friendship with its previous enemy, Russia. Let's all take a deep breath on that one. But the emergence of India as a manufacturing superpower looks like it will soon become a real reality. I mean, India has its own space program and is leading the globe in population now. There's a lot of change and uncertainty coming up in 2025. Who will be elected in the U.S. will have a huge impact on what China does or doesn't do. China may have not liked President Biden's policies, but they knew where they stood. With Trump in the past, China has shown it worries because they have no idea what he will do next. And what about its new friend, Russia? Can China produce better trade with its former enemy? And will Russia stick by China in the future? Right now, much of the questions are still up in the air, but we will continue to keep updating you on the geopolitical scene right here on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito. My name is LeCain, and we are discussing interesting stories going on around the world. The West Bank. What is and where is the West Bank? Well, basically, it's on the West Bank of the Jordan River, and on the other side borders Israel. Of the two Palestinian territories, it is definitely the largest, with some 3 million Palestinians there. Now, the other Palestinian territory we are very familiar with because we talk about it quite a bit on the show is Gaza. When the Palestinians attacked Israel back in 2023, the Israeli military went after Gaza. Many Palestinians have died as a result of that retaliation, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000. And since then, there has been a huge push by the West, mostly the U.S., to stop killing Palestinians, who consist largely of women and children, and put together a ceasefire agreement to stop this war, which is starting to look like a justification to wipe out the Palestinians. The Israelis are like, okay, we will talk about a ceasefire, but that doesn't mean we can't attack the West Bank. I mean, ceasefire is fine, but just for Gaza, right? Yes, this week, on Wednesday, the Israeli military began an offensive strike in the West Bank, launching raids and airstrikes into densely populated civilian areas. Now, even though this area has a major population of Palestinians, Israel still has a claim on the area as their own. So, suffice to say, they have a hold over all military in that region. The reasoning they are giving for this massive attack this week is that it's necessary in order to stem off further terror attacks on its territory. The United Nations has called on Israel to immediately cease its operations in the West Bank, but Israel says no. In fact, it says it's just getting started. Now, Israel took this land from the Jordanians back in 1967 in the Six-Day War, in which they took the West Bank and Jerusalem from Jordan. Then they took Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, also the Golan Heights from Syria. Israel believes that they have the rights to this land because they have a biblical and ancestral right to the land. Israel originally took the lands due to its preemptive strikes it made against Egypt, which is not much different than what it's doing now in the West Bank. It's claiming that it must do surprise preemptive attacks to stop the terrorists from attacking them first, like it did to Egypt back in 1967 when it originally took over the Palestinian territories. Now, even if though this is still considered the land of the Palestinians, Israel has built settlements in the West Bank, even though they are considered illegal under international law. And to make matters worse, the settlers in those parts continue to harass the Palestinians. Now, Israel is saying it's sending in missiles and artillery to root out the terrorists that are hiding in the region, causing terror. But the Palestinians are saying they are doing it to simply drive the Palestinians away. Now, this incident that happened on Wednesday is the largest attack Israel has done in this area in decades. And Israel says this is just the beginning, that they have plans to initiate more raids and more strikes in the coming weeks. When you watch the videos, you see a lot of construction trucks just coming and deliberately tearing up the streets. The Israelis say they have to do this to check for bombs in the road. However, it also makes travel in the area more difficult and harder to move supplies and medical aid. You will also see a lot of burning tires in the street all around because the Palestinians will burn the tires to try to create lots of smoke so that when the Israeli military drives through, they can throw rocks at them and not risk being seen. Now, there are terrorist organizations in the West Bank, and that has been proven time and time again. And we know that Hezbollah and Iran have gone to great lengths to try and supply these groups with weapons. But on the side of Israel, there's also Jewish settlers who are just as violent, attacking other Palestinians. Now, the U.S. has stepped in to say, listen, we understand that what you have to do, but you need to make sure that the law applies to both Palestinians and Jews equally. Of course, there are officials there that say, no, there are different laws for Palestinians than there are for Jews. Can you imagine being a Palestinian and hearing that? You see, because in the West Bank, unlike Gaza, there are no real borders between the Israelis and the Palestinians. In Gaza, which is much smaller, there is a line, and you, like that, must cross that line to get in and out of Gaza. In the West Bank, everyone's in there together. In other words, skirmishes happen all the time with the Jews and their neighbors. But of course, this week was not that. This was a full-scale military assault on 4 different cities in the West Bank. This is a far cry from the situation in the 1990s when Israel and Palestine factions began the process of establishing a Palestinian state. Remember that? The Oslo Accords. They had established the creation of an interim Palestinian government known as the Palestinian Authority, and they had control over a portion of the West Bank. But those talks about the creation of a Palestinian state never materialized. Why? Because every time they would get close, someone would fire his gun and someone else would, and then there would be a vow of revenge, etc., etc. So anyway, the current Israeli government has completely ruled out giving autonomy to the Palestinians and seems to no longer be open to the idea at all, which many believe would solve the whole conflict. Just give the Palestinian their land. That's the whole thought behind it. Right now, Palestinian Authority only has 18% of the West Bank under its control, while 22% is shared control between the two, and 60% is under the Israeli military. Now, Gaza is a different story. Israel withdrew its troops there and the settlers from Gaza in 2005, but in 2007, Hamas won the elections there and took control. And as we know, Hamas has that whole death to Jews thing. And they, of course, attacked an Israeli community out of nowhere last October, which many say started the war. But, of course, the Palestinians side, they say the war started way before that. You see, since Palestinians had gotten the rights to live on the land, Israel has been moving settlements into both the West Bank and Gaza illegally, according to the International Court of Justice, and, of course, the Palestinian government. But the Palestinians can't do really much but throw rocks at Israel because they have all the guns and the Apache helicopters. The 700,000 settlers living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are considered illegal under international law and have been warned by the international community to get out, fearing something bad would come of it. Some of the settlements were built under government order, and some are just built by people hoping that soon the Israeli government would just say, all right, you can stay. Some were even built up right against the Palestinians' private lands. The President Netanyahu has pushed the approval of Palestinian land seizures in the West Bank, even though they contend it's illegal. This is one of the biggest problems moving forward with getting a peace deal between the Palestinians. Israel just keeps moving the lines and changing the rules. In any case, since the attack of Hamas and the deaths of 1,200 people of Israel, over 40,000 Palestinians have died. Most of them were killed in Gaza, but still, 652 Palestinians have died in the West Bank, and 150 of those were children. The big question is it the Israeli military that's killing the people, or is it the settlers? Are they the ones killing the people? And if it's the settlers, what is the military going to do about it? The answer seems to be nothing. But when the 2 Israeli settlers were killed in the town of Hawara, a Palestinian town, the Israeli finance minister said Hawara needs to be erased. What does it mean to be erased? Earlier this month, more than 70 armed settlers invaded a Palestinian town, firing bullets and tear gas, setting cars and homes on fire. These are not police or military. These are just regular people breaking the law. Since the attack of October 7th, there have been a total of 1,270 attacks on Palestinians by Jewish settlers, and of those, 120 attacks led to Palestinian fatalities and injuries. But these attacks this week were of the military, not the settlers. Israel says they are sure that there are terrorists hiding in the West Bank and they are planning an attack of their own. Their group is made up of young men who have been dealing with the Israel occupation their whole lives. So in some ways, the Israeli government is responsible for the groups that are currently fighting against them. And there is an extreme dislike of the young people of the Palestinian Authority because they can't do anything to protect their own people. So, according to the Palestinians of the West Bank, the latest aggression of the Israeli military is an open declaration of war. What does this mean? It means that the peace in the Middle East is moving farther and farther away from realistically happening. That as long as the Israeli government continues building settlements on land that is for the Palestinians, there can never be peace. This is a problem even for the West. I mean, we think we know who the bad people are in this conflict, but sometimes it becomes a bit blurry as to who that really is. You may think it's the Palestinians, but is it? Maybe both have good people and both have bad people. There are people that only want peace, and there are people that want anything but peace. Unfortunately, those are the ones who are currently in charge. This is the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. My name is LeCain, and we are discussing interesting stories going on around the world. So let's move over to our ongoing coverage of the U.S. election. Well, the U.S. political scene took some interesting twists this week. Well, what week does it not take interesting twists? But this week, after the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, they're over now. Everyone is eagerly awaiting to see how the polls are coming along. And as of now, it looks as if Kamala Harris is in the overall lead in most of the U.S. polls, which is understandable since the DNC just ended and it went off without any major screw-ups. In fact, more people watch the DNC than watch the RNC. But what does this really mean? Well, not really much. You can be ahead in the overall vote right up to the election and still lose, as we have seen in recent history. You see, the polls that really matter are not the country's popularity polls, but rather the individual state polls. Now, the swing states or the battleground states or the toss-up states or the states where it's so evenly divided that you're not blue or red, but rather purple, it's really where you need to focus our attention. Now, there is a phrase that you will hear a lot in the election as it nears, and that is that this state is in play. It could go to Trump. It could go to Harris. We don't know. It's so close. All we know is that this state is in play. Now, my state of North Carolina, where I'm from, is considered in play. It's when a state which normally polls either blue or red now falls within the margin of error. So you can't really tell who is really ahead. Now, North Carolina normally is a Republican state, especially in my neighborhood, which means it is very pro-Trump. However, recently, Kamala Harris has come within 1 percentage point behind Trump in the latest polling data. In fact, some even have her tied, and some even have her ahead by a single point. But even she is close. I really don't think Kamala can win North Carolina, but she is currently doing something Joe Biden couldn't do there, and that is put the state in play. Now, as I have said before, in the U.S., the popular vote is great to win, but what's even better to win are the 270 votes in the Electoral College, because once you get to that number, the other candidate can only get 268 because there's only 538 total votes. Now, in almost all states, whoever gets the most votes gets to pick the people who will go to D.C. on January 6th and cast the vote for president for that state. For instance, in my state of North Carolina, there's a total of 16 votes. If Kamala Harris were to somehow get the highest number of votes from the popular vote, the electors would cast all 16 votes to Kamala. Even if she gets 10 million votes and Trump gets 9,999,999, she would still get all 16. Now, most states are already decided. California's 54 votes will go to Kamala Harris, and Texas's 40 votes will go to Trump. You know, unless pigs fly, which can and has happened in the past. But you never know how some people will vote. So out of the 50 states, the winner of the presidency comes down to around 10 purple states. States where the polls have the candidates within 5 points of each other. So if you were to do the math today, looking at each swing state and where it's leaning, the whole election could come down to one single place, Georgia, which is known as the Peach State, which is because they grow mostly peaches there. We did a story on the Jam a while back about Georgia. They had a program to deport all the illegal aliens from Georgia. The program worked very well. However, in the end, they didn't have enough people to pick the peaches. So millions of dollars in peaches rotted before they could be picked. This led to the great peach shortage of 2011. But in any case, it seems as of now, whoever can win Georgia can most likely win the whole election. If you remember, in the last election, Donald Trump called up the head of Georgia's election board, asked him to find 11,000 votes. In other words, Joe Biden was beating Trump by just over 11,000 votes. This, of course, led to the indictment of Trump and his buddies for trying to steal an election by trying to talk to the official into either adding 11,000 to Trump's total or subtracting 11,000 to Biden's total. But instead, the official just recorded Trump so everyone could later hear it on CNN and ABC and NBC and CBS, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a good example of how razor close the presidential election can be. In the 2000 election between Bush and Gore, several votes got thrown out in Florida, resulting in Bush winning the 30 electoral votes in Florida, the third largest in the country, by just 6 votes. That's where the statement, "every vote counts," is really true. Which is also why, after the DNC had concluded, the first place Kamala Harris went to was Georgia. She and her running mate, Tim Walz, are doing a bus tour through Georgia. Now, in the big cities of Georgia, with its big colleges and educated people, they love Kamala Harris. She can hold big rallies with lots of screaming fans and can bring down the House because that's where the Democrats are. Which is why Kamala Harris is not going to those towns. Instead, she is going to the small rural areas where all the Republicans are and where she will never ever win, where the people in general do not like her. Remember, this is the Deep South, where there is a clear racial divide. So why is Kamala even going there? Because right now, she is in what pollsters call a statistical tie in Georgia, and it's in play. And Georgia carries 16 electoral votes. It really could be the single deciding state in this upcoming election. So the idea is, if Kamala can get, say, 2 2 people out of 100 in the super rural Republican areas to not vote for Trump, it might be worth it. So that's what Kamala is doing. Now, on the Trump side, he is working on his fundraising. This week, he introduced some new NFT trading cards. Now, this collection of cards will include the picture of Trump in an Iron Man suit holding a shield with the Bitcoin emblem on it. Trump said, quote, "You know, they call me the crypto president. I don't know if that's true or not, but a lot of people are saying that," end quote. Trump has previously courted the support of the cryptocurrency traders of America, and he seems to be reaching out to them again. Now, there is a special deal with these cards that if you buy 15 cards at $99 each, you will get a physical card that has a piece of the actual suit Trump was wearing when he went up against Joe Biden in the most recent debate. Trump said people are calling it the knockout suit. I don't know about that, but that's what they're calling it. Now, just to reiterate, Joe Biden is no longer running for president. Just making sure everybody knows that. Speaking of debates, I know how much we are all looking forward to seeing the debate between Trump and Harris on September 10th, but this week there is some doubt about that debate. As we remember, Trump was supposed to debate Biden on ABC on that day, but when Harris took over, he said he would not debate her. So Kamala said he must be too scared to debate her. So Trump said he will debate her, but only on Fox and with an audience, which I assume is a Fox News audience. So then Harris's people said, "Are you crazy? We aren't going to do that." So Trump then said Harris was too scared to debate him, but everyone was like, "Oh yeah, I don't really think so." So Trump said, okay, I will debate Harris at that date I originally agreed to because she is dumb and horrible debater and she's ruining the country, et cetera, et cetera. But this week, Trump said, well, maybe not, because he said ABC doesn't like Trump. And also there are some suggested changes. Harris wants the microphones left in the on position. Remember in the previous election, Biden-Trump debate when they had to turn the mics off because Trump kept interrupting all the time? So Trump said he would keep the mics on because he doesn't care. But then the Trump campaign people said, no, we want the mics off. Then the Harris staff said, well, the reason that is because Trump's people are worried that Trump won't be able to manage himself for 90 minutes. But in any case, will Trump show up to the debate? Well, I'm pretty sure he has to now because otherwise he will appear weak and afraid. In any case, I'm sure he will keep us guessing right up to the day before. But this week, the debate is not the biggest thing Trump needs to worry about. Trump will be sentenced soon for being found guilty in his criminal trial on 34 counts of fraud in New York. Remember, this is the trial involving the porn star Stormy Daniels. Now, let me say again, this doesn't have anything to do with Trump having sex with a porn star, being spanked by the porn star with a rolled up Forbes magazine with Trump's picture on the front while his wife is at home with their newborn son. No, this is about the hiding of the payment he made to that porn star to keep her quiet about the incident, and that the hiding of the money is considered election interference. Few people have already gone to jail in relation to this incident, so it's a bit serious. So on September 18th, the judge, who Trump constantly has insulted on social media and in the press, will decide how much jail time Trump will get for his guilty verdict, or whether he will get home confinement, or maybe community service, or just probation, which is probably what I think. The reason, of course, the sentencing took so long is because of the Supreme Court ruling that Trump is immune from prosecution for official acts as president. So it had to be decided if Trump trying to hide the money he spent to cover up his hour of passion with the porn star Stormy Daniels was an official presidential act or not, because he wrote some of the checks while he was president. So let me just say how crazy it will be if Trump is sentenced to jail just a few months before the election. And by the way, what about all the other Trump cases? Well, this week, there was a twist in that story, too. See, Jack Smith, the special prosecutor assigned to the case about Trump's involvement in January 6th, did something unexpected. Remember, Trump was about to go to trial, but it got stopped because, here again, Supreme Court made a judgment that President Trump may be immune from trying to overthrow the government because he was possibly doing it as an act of being president, which for many, including me, seems a bit of a stretch. I mean, telling a crowd to go to the Capitol to take back our country, a crowd with the intent of killing the vice president because you tweeted he wouldn't do what was needed, is that an official act as president? Seems also like a bit of a stretch. But what the special counsel did this week, which surprised a lot of people, was he re-indicted President Trump. He basically went in front of a new grand jury and argued the exact same case with the exact same charges, but this time taking out anything that could be construed as an official act as president, and removed from the indictment any people that worked for the White House that might have been acting in the manner as possible official acts, and also showing that the vice president was in essence acting as the head of the Senate and not the vice president. This could be a very sticky situation for Trump to get out of because, I mean, if they can get Vice President Pence on the stand and question him under oath about what the president asked him to do, it seems maybe like they got him. But I have said that a lot on the show before, and in the end, somehow Trump's lawyers always figure out a way out. But the issue is not so much if Trump will be found guilty of sedition or treason, but will Trump's lawyers try to appeal something? And if by appealing, will the public get to hear all the things that Trump did leading up to January 6th again? And will we hear what's new or what's recently been discovered? Now, I'm not going to rehash all the stuff that we have talked about regarding the January 6th trial, except that every time we think it's dead in the water, it somehow comes back to life. Of course, if Trump becomes president, its head will be cut off and be thrown back into the water, which technically will make it dead in the water. Now, we have kind of a veered down the path away from the election talk about, Trump's troubles leading to the presidential election, but what about Kamala Harris? Right now, she seems to be dancing down the yellow brick road on her way to winning the election. She has a huge number of people volunteering to help her. She raised over $500 million, and she is ahead in the polls. But remember, the election is around 8 weeks away. All kinds of things can happen in 8 weeks, and she still has to go up a lot of mountains before this election. First of all, she has that debate. If Trump actually shows up, how is she going to handle him? I mean, you can practice your whole life in debating and still not be ready for someone like Trump. He doesn't follow the rules. He doesn't always tell the truth, and he will attack you and the moderator. So how do you prepare for that? Also, Kamala, there has been a lot of criticism for Kamala for not doing interviews since she was nominated. The Republicans and Trump have blasted her for not doing an interview where she has to answer some tough questions. For instance, can she explain the status of the economy right now? Trump is saying the economy is in shambles and America is on its way to a depression, that the people of the U.S. want to go back to a time when they could afford things like food and gas and homes. Republicans have been coming after her on her record on the Mexican border, saying she allowed millions of illegal immigrants to come into the country, as she has been labeled as the border czar. Now, many of these accusations are easily explained away, but she will have to be able to convince those swing voters that are very skeptical of her still now. Also, she has changed her position on many issues since she's been in the vice presidency. Every president and vice president, senator, congressman throughout time has done this. They have an idea for a position. Once they get into office, then they realize the game of politics, and they quickly realize you can't always be what you had hoped that you would be. So Kamala really had to have an interview, and that interview happened on CNN yesterday. The interviewer was Dana Bash, who was a good choice, I think. She's not going to hold back on the hard questions, and she's not going to ask a lot of leading or stupid softball questions, which drives me crazy when they do that. But in any case, she put it to Kamala, which is what was needed for Kamala to answer the whys and the how comes and the how do you explain this that, the Trump's people keeps constantly harping on. I mean, is she her own candidate, or is she just Biden light? Well, Dana Bash started right with the big one. What are you going to do on day one? This is a question she needed to answer, in contrast to Trump, who, when asked that question, said he will be a dictator on day one. But Harris went a different route, but still just as vague as Trump. She said she will support and strengthen the middle class. Then she went into something called opportunity economy. Pretty catchy phrase, but still no specifics. Very vague, typical politician answers. But then it came to the issue of fracking, which is gold for Republicans, because before she said she would ban fracking, but later said she would welcome fracking. The idea is she changed her mind just to get more votes. By the way, fracking is a method of drilling for natural gas under the surface of the earth. Many believe is an environmental hazard. You know, Harris has always said she supported the Green New Deal, which is a policy brought about by the progressive Democrats in Congress. So why did she change her mind? She talked about how the climate crisis is real, opposing Trump, who says it's not real, and how she's putting the most money in history toward reversing climate change. Okay, all right, middle of the road. Then the big guns came out. Why did you change your mind on decriminalizing illegal border crossings in Mexico? Here's where she did a little bit better. She said she's the only person in the presidential race who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations who traffic in guns, drugs, and human beings. I looked it up, and that is true. She brought the talking point that the only reason that they didn't pass a border bill was because the border bill, which was written by a Republican, was killed by Trump, who asked the Republicans not to vote for it because he needed to be able to say Biden didn't pass any border legislation, which is true. She was also asked to make a comment on Trump's accusation that she just turned black because it's better for her politically. She said, same old tired playbook. Next question, please. Dana Bash then said, that's it. And Harris said, that's it. Now, let's stop for a second. I would have to expect that Harris really would pound Trump here on his obvious racial comment, but she didn't. The reason, which is also obvious, is that she is not going to use up her time on the interview on a Trump statement about her blackness. I have a feeling this is also how she's going to handle the debate, because basically don't get suckered into an argument like Joe Biden did when Trump pressed him on who can hit a golf ball farther. Now, moving on in the interview, Harris really went into the opposite direction of Trump, whereas Trump is either you're with me or you're against me. But if you're against me, watch out because I'm coming for you. Harris played up the idea that even if you don't like her, she will still be the best president she can be for you. She said, I'm running because I believe that I'm the best person to do this job at the moment for all Americans, regardless of race or gender. But really, the question in many people's minds is, are we better off now than we were 4 years ago under Trump? And that question is going to get continually asked all the way to the election. Harris, of course, points out that 4 years ago, thousands of people were dying every day to the mismanagement of the pandemic. The value of the economy had lost more points than in 50 years, and the number of jobs in America was in the negative. But after 4 years of Biden-Harris, the economy is up, job growth is up, inflation is dropping. Now, all of those are true, but when you hear Trump, he will say inflation is up, rent is up, groceries are up, which is also true. However, these specific things are up all over the world. Factually, the U.S. is actually leading the world in recovering from the pandemic. But in any case, when you start throwing down facts, it really comes down to how you throw them down. Each side, both Republicans and Democrats, have its own way of looking at it. You know, this election is going to probably end up being insane. I mean, you have an old white man versus a much younger black Asian woman. You have a guy that grew up rich and a girl that grew up working at McDonald's. You have a man that has a history of being prosecuted for fraud and sexual assault versus a woman that has a history of prosecuting fraud and sexual assault. You have a former president and a current vice president. Never in history of the United States presidential elections has anything like this even come close. Right now, Kamala Harris is saying, we will never go back. as a country, you should move forward. And at the same time, Trump is saying we should go back to a time when things were cheaper and rich people could get great tax cuts. In reality, I wish I could go back to when I was a kid, when gas was 80 cents and a movie cost $1, including popcorn and a Coke. But we can't go backwards. We can only go forwards. Would Harris be better for Americans' middle class, which is just about everybody? Well, she says she can. But like Trump, she has no specifics yet. I understand sort of why that is. You either want to make a misstep to alienate someone. I mean, the MAGA people are going to vote for Trump no matter what, how many years in prison he gets, or how many convictions, or how many racist comments he makes. The liberal Democrats are going to vote for Harris no matter what a box of cereal costs, or how much their rent is, or their gas, or whether she's really black or Indian. The only people that really matter are the people that really don't care that much. The people that watch Netflix only and not the news. The people that live in Georgia or North Carolina or Pennsylvania that vote once every 4 years. And just 2 months before the election, they still don't know who they're going to vote for. These are the most important people in the U.S. come November 6th. Those are the ones that really will decide the leader of the free world, the person with the nuclear codes in charge of the largest military on the planet. So let's hope they make the right decision, whatever that might be. This is LeCain on the World News Jam on DZRJ and Radio Bandito TV. Thank you for joining us to discuss interesting stories from around the world. So until next week, everyone be safe out there, and we will see you then.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.